Hi, everyone. Welcome to Your Employees Are Suffering. Are You Listening? Brought to you by the Citrix Strategic Advisory Team. My name is Chris Voci. I'm a customer engagement strategist on that team, and I work regularly with our customers, advising them on how to understand and embrace employee experience as part of their strategy. You don't have to go too far today to hear about the topics of the future of work, employee listening, empathy, employee experience. All these things are getting a lot of attention today. So my colleagues and I wanted to put together a panel for you, a webinar, just to give you some more insight into these topics, and more importantly, some best practices and advice to help you be more effective. So without further ado, I'm joined by two colleagues who just done some fantastic thinking in the space today. And so let me introduce them. First, I want to introduce Renee Flores, a teammate of mine on the strategic advisory team, who's just done some amazing work, both for Citrix and our clients in and around design thinking. Renee, first of all, hello. Can you tell us a little bit about your role?
Hey, Chris, thanks for having me. Really excited to talk about this. For the past 6 years or so, I've been working with our customers and even within our own IT organization to look at how do we start to bridge the gap between experience and technology. And using things like, methodologies like design thinking really fits in nicely where you spend a lot of time up front with a lot of empathy, making sure that you really understand the problem that you're trying to solve from the customer's point of view. So this is near and dear to my heart. I'm extremely passionate about technologists growing into understanding their role and delivering a great employee experience, and looking forward to talking with you guys today.
Excellent. Thanks, Renee. And second, last but not least, is one of my colleagues, Brendan, from Citrix's own IT organization, who's just been doing some fantastic work that, frankly, Renee and I benefit from greatly. But Brendan, why don't you tell a little bit us about and the audience about your role?
Absolutely. So I lead our service delivery organization, where we're really focused on the overall delivery of IT and the value that IT provides to the business. So looking at our service orientation and our business centricity to make sure that everything that we do is focused around bringing value to the organization. And the key to that, of course, is engaging our stakeholders and our end users to understand those areas of improvement or areas of opportunity that we have.
Awesome. Thanks. Just to get things going, what I wanted to do is go back to a conversation the three of us had in April, I think we were starting to be firmly in the pandemic. And, Brendan, you brought up a term that, I think we all just latched onto. And, it's part of the title of this, but you spoke about the silent sufferers. Now, what does that mean? Who are the silent sufferers?
So the way that we look at it from a silent suffering standpoint are those who have just accepted the way that we operate. So they're not engaged with us, they're not using key services, or they're not reaching out for assistance because there's too much friction to get something done when they engage with IT. So they've either walked down the hallway to go to a different printer because the printer closest to them has stopped working. They maybe added 3 more steps into a process internally into their department because something stopped working, and they would rather just add the complexity in their own space than engaging with IT because the friction that's there. And so these folks might not be making a lot of noise or kind of the loudest voice out there, but they're suffering, and they just found a way around it because they've kind of lost hope in terms of getting something resolved or in terms of utilizing the services that are out there.
Yeah. Renee, I know you've used this term quite a bit too in some of your engagements.
Yeah, you think about the people that aren't engaging in the service. And then I think naturally about when I worked with customers and they show me these amazing NPS scores, like how amazing they're doing in terms of the product and services that they've deployed. And you're like, well, what about all these people that you're not engaging with or that don't engage with you and they're just sitting out there? So you're only hearing from those that even will come into your service. So it's an important term to really start to identify who is our audience, how do we reach out to them, how do we engage them into us, and how do we bring them into the conversation? Because they're the ones that are going to help you really identify what the problems are, as opposed to relying on what I call like amazing NPS numbers. I mean, Brendan, we were talking last week, and I loved, you're just like the amazing namer of things. So you said something about a watermelon, and I talk about latching on to something.
Absolutely. The watermelon SLAs are what we call them. And so on the outside, on those dashboards and reports, everything is green, everything looks great. But when you dig down into them, you actually engage with the end users, your stakeholders, and find out how their experience is. It's bright, bright red. It's the complete opposite of what you're seeing on the dashboard.
Renee, I was just thinking back to a conversation that you and I had, about a business, an organization, a customer that we were working with. And we were a couple of months into COVID, and you had asked him, hey, how are things going? And I believe he responded, great. And then you followed up with a question for him. Let's talk about that.
Yeah, I said, how do you know that? How do you know it's going great? And he was like, well, I'm not hearing that it's not. And I think that is why this listening thing that we're going to get into is so important. And my first prompt to him is like, let's validate that assumption. I mean, look, it's easy to get into the thought or the mindset of, well, I'm not hearing anybody complaining, so everything must be great. And that points back to Brendan's point about silent sufferers. It is really important that that IT create mechanisms to have a very rapid pipe into what's going on with the employees, and meaning, how do you easily hear from them first that something's going on, or even reading the tea leaves that something may be brewing before it becomes a full-blown escalation. And I think the other reason why this is so important, Chris, is, like I said, I've worked with a lot of different organizations, and the common theme I hear is, my hair is always on fire. Mm-hmm. And I call that being under the wheel, right? And that's being in the reactive mode of having to react to whatever you're getting, as opposed to being on top of the wheel. And if you could establish these listening posts and these abilities to hear employees, it puts you in a position to hear it first before it becomes so big that the hair gets on fire.
I love it. I love it. Why don't we start to transition to, I think we've talked a little bit about the importance of it. I think there is one other, word that we haven't mentioned that I think is, a source of pain for a lot of IT, and that's adoption. And that's really where, they see a lot of difficulty. I don't know. Do either of you guys want to pick up on the importance or, the relationship between adoption and listening? How about you, Brendan?
Sure, absolutely. I think the key with adoption is just closing the loop. At the end of the day, if an employee is taking time to be able to give their feedback or engage, they want to know that it's being valued and that it's being used. And so that's the key that we focus on is just making sure we close that loop. So if someone provides us that feedback, which is gold for us to be able to continuously improve, how do we close that loop to show them what that feedback brought? And so we've done this in a couple different ways. We've done it with one of our main initiatives that we have around the usage of our own products inside the organization. So how can you provide feedback on the product, and how do you find out what that feedback has done, whether it's gone to our product team to bring future enhancements in the product, or it's come into IT to improve how we have something configured. We found that once people see their feedback actually being used and leveraged, we start seeing a higher level of adoption. And the same, I think, is just for any type of small rollouts. We had this in the past, where it kind of goes back to that silent suffering mindset, where we rolled out a new piece of technology, and at the beginning there were some bumps along the road, and it kind of fizzled out, and everyone, to Renee's point, thought that, hey, no one's screaming, everything must be good now. And we did a quick just pulse survey, and we did that survey directly in the chat-based collaboration tool that we use. So these individuals didn't have to leave where they were. We met them where they were, asked them one question about the value that this new technology was providing. And it was quite the opposite of that thought that we had, that, hey, no one's screaming, so everything must be good. And it allowed us to really dig in and get some good insights around areas of opportunity and improvement.
I love that. I love that. Renee, over to you. Talk a little bit about adoption. I know this is a topic near and dear to your heart.
Yeah, it's a big thing. And I love what Brendan just said about getting those rapid insights back into the process as you're building out and launching a technology across the enterprise, and getting that early and often so that you can iterate and ensure that as you go more broader across the adoption curve, that you're going to get that stickiness that you're looking for. Not just that they're using it, but they're using it and feel really good about it. And that's really the benefit of establishing a great listening program. And adoption roadblockers can come up in many different ways within IT. Again, I've seen it come up where IT's met the requirements, they put it out, and next thing you know, the employees are sitting there saying, this isn't anything like what I need. It's not really for me. And the way to, the way to stop that from happening is to really ensure that you understand what problem is that you're solving for your customer or your employees, because you'll hear me talk employee experience and customer experience methodologies. They're completely blended. But really understanding the problem that you're solving and ensuring that you're bringing in your employees to co-design the launch that you're about to do. Make sure that their voice is helping to guide your actual launch of the technology. And co-design, I think, is something that we leave out of the fray quite a bit. But imagine if you had a group of employees that were part of the actual design of the launch, part of the actual awareness campaigns, email campaigns, however it is that you were going to build the awareness of the product in the company, and that they're there to help you give that voice constantly through the design is really powerful, and can help really lead to some amazing adoption success.
Renee, I'm so glad you went there. You were actually making me think back to a couple of years ago in my prior role. It was part of an employee experience council. So in the room, we had EX leaders, employee experience, EX leaders from within HR, within IT, within customer experience, from about 35 organizations. And we did a quick design thinking exercise with them. And, as part of that, we had brought in a bunch of end users and did basically tried to, design a new workspace, a new little quiet area, within the building. And, afterwards, when we talked with, the attendees, the IT leaders, HR leaders, and the CX leaders, and, to a person, they kept saying, wow, just hearing from the employees that were actually using the space, what their insights were, what their frustrations were, what they wanted, what was getting in their way, how could they get around it? People react a lot differently. And, by the way, these were some pretty, the attendees were very advanced, already down the employee experience curve, but there was just that extra nudge of getting that, we sometimes assume a lot about those individuals that we hear from.
The assumptions build. I say, look, people are successful for a reason. They've built a lot of knowledge. You have a lot of experience. You're like, if we do it this way, it'll work. I've done it like this before, and I've seen great success. Things change, audiences change, our customers change, things evolve. And it's a real important challenge for each one of us to constantly question, who else can I bring into this process to ensure that whatever I deliver will make sense to them? IT serves the employee. We are servants of the employee. And I think it is super important to remember that we serve people, and we're here to do whatever we can to make them as productive as possible. And so bringing them into that process, like what you were talking about, Chris, having leadership across the business, like IT, HR, facilities, any parts of the business that you're serving as part of the design process with the employees is very powerful.
I love it. I love it. Now, Brendan, I wanted to shift to you because you just brought up something earlier I wanted to go back to, because I wanted to shift and, start to talk a little bit about some of the tactics and things that people can do today. You brought up the Pulse survey, and I love that one because it was a very quick exercise. I was wondering if you could just talk a little bit more about what you did, why, and then what, perhaps some of the outcomes of having done that.
Absolutely. So I think the key is just using a variety of different techniques. And so the pulse survey was one that we used where we wanted that instant feedback so that we can action that, rapidly, bring in a Tiger team to take action, remediate the situation. And so that was a new technology we were going live with, and we wanted to just get that feedback immediately. So it was quick, one question: is this working or is it not working? And then we actioned accordingly. We take some different tactics based on the audience, and that's something that we've learned along the way, where you have certain audiences who prefer that survey. They prefer, engaging with you through a survey. You have other audiences who love that FaceTime, sitting together in a group or one-on-one to be able to provide their feedback and get a little more intimate and personal in it. So I really think it depends on, your audience and also what you're looking to achieve and the outcomes that you want, based on the different tools in your tool bag that you leverage to get this feedback.
Absolutely. Now, I wanted to talk, staying on the subject of, tactics, as we start to broaden out, I think it begs the question, okay, how does someone, build and develop? What are some of the different parts or stages in an effective listening function? Because, we, of course, you just talked about a pulse survey, but a lot of organizations, their primary, listening post is, some kind of big annual benchmark survey. Renee, what are those, I'd say that's the first step. What are those good for? What is that good? What is that annual benchmark survey good for? What can that tell you?
Yeah, I think surveys have a place in the world. It's not like they are. I say it like this. It's a good way to see which way the ship is headed, right? Mm-hmm. Are things going in the right direction? Thank you, right? And typically, there's a lot of text that goes into those. And I always like the text is actually the meat of really what is going on out there. And I think it's important to understand that nothing beats looking an employee in the eye and asking them a question to understand the why or the underbelly. So taking what you hear in those big surveys, great, but then really dig in and understand, why did they answer that way? What was driving that answer? Get into the sentiment and emotion behind that. A lot of times IT doesn't remember that there's people that they're connecting to. They press buttons and things happen, but there's people that have real thoughts, real feelings, real emotion. And if IT can start to connect to that emotion and that sentiment, it's really powerful to speak to them in that way. And by the way, you ask employees what they think, and you take the time even just to pick up the phone or come on a Teams call and say, how's it going? You're building advocates for life, because they feel heard, they feel listened to, and they know that you care about them. And you were saying like there's these big surveys. I think one of the hardest parts, Chris, is just knowing where to start. Mm-hmm. And I think it can be very challenging for some folks that have been in IT roles for a while to actually make that first move. And I say, keep it simple. Just call one of your friends, even a friendly that you've known for years, and just say, how are we doing? Like, how's it going? What are you liking about this? What aren't you liking? And just open with a very simple conversation. It's kind of addicting. I'll say that.
Oh, I love it. I love it. I think you captured that well, that a lot of those, annual kind of bigger surveys, they tend to be like a top level signal. I mean, you're not really going to be able to derive a lot of action out of it, but it's going to kind of tell you where the heat is. As we were, as part of some other work, that Citrix is doing about operationalizing employee experience, we've interviewed, a lot of employee experience leaders, both within HR, IT, and, the next thing that came up is, after you have that top level signal, there's refinement. And I think this is, exactly what you were driving for. Based on those survey results, can I deploy some sort of subsequent method to dig deeper into those areas? So if it's like technology, some sort of technology challenge, is it something they use for work, or is it something that they engage with customers? But Brendan, I wanted to ask you, so, based on some of the, things that you've heard, how are we, kind of starting to, peel back the layer a little bit to find out what might be going on?
Absolutely. So we're doing a couple or multiple different things. One of them is just that feedback loop. So looking at how do we close the loop? So focus really on our product and the usage of our product in the company. How do we become that, or how do we continue that customer one notion and get people to participate, engage with us, provide feedback, and then we close the loop. The other piece is around our more so transactional type of engagement. So when someone contacts support and they have a ticket raised, how do we understand how that experience went? And we do that with a simple survey after their ticket is resolved. And then some of them more so specific to a product is really, like Renee talked about, engaging the customer at the very beginning. So we did this successfully recently with the launch of a brand new service portal. So we were redesigning our service portal where employees can go to get help and assistance. And so we took a totally different approach to this. And I think in the past, from the IT standpoint, we would sit in a room and think of, what we would want from a portal. And we kind of challenged ourselves, and we decided to come up with just a very raw wireframe of what this would look like, and then take a leap down to the cafeteria. This was when we were back in the office, of course. And we got a box of cookies, and we walked around the cafeteria and put it down in front of individuals, asking them, what would you use this for? What does this look like you would actually do with this? And so iteration after iteration after iteration, we came back with our final product, but it was designed by the end users. It was designed by the employees, and the engagement and the adoption that we've seen in our portal is nothing like we've seen in the past. And I think it's really a testament to them designing it, them knowing how they want to engage with IT, and them having some skin in the game. So they were really driving this design as well. So we've taken a couple different approaches, and I think it goes back to, depending on what you're trying to accomplish, is your different tactics that you would use. I think everyone's natural instinct is to go straight to a survey. And I think there's a right place, like Renee said, there's a right place and right time for that survey. But, just sitting with the employee and engaging with them, you'll get more out of it than you would ever get through in a survey, I think.
I love that. Renee, I was actually, were you going to?
Yeah, it made me think of something. Survey is lagging data, right? It's already happened. And what Brendan's talking about is leading with design thinking methodologies. And a lot of people get overwhelmed by design thinking. They think it's some big process, and you have to get 100 people in the room, and you have to have 1,000 Post-it notes for it to even be successful. But what I love about what Brendan did is so simple. It's taking a prototype, right? It's taking a first round. You don't care. You haven't invested any resources in it. You can crumple it up and throw it away, but they just put it right in front of the customer. They just allowed to get that ethereal reaction to it, to hear what they would say. And then they iterated, and then they tested, and then they iterated. And this was cookies. It cost you cookies. And that's really the big piece of this about listening to your employees. It's not just so much about, where they are today. It's also about how are you going to innovate, even if it's just around a portal. How will we innovate and include the employee voice in there is everything. And I think that Brendan's results are really speaking to how that can be so effective. It's amazing.
I love that. I love that, Renee. And actually, you hit on just what I was going to ask you about, kind of thinking about it from taking a step back and just looking at the process altogether. It goes without saying, I wish I was in the cafeteria that day for a cookie, but
I think we all want to be in the cafeteria having a cookie right now.
Oh gosh, I love it. Now, I actually want to pick, to kind of point out, a handful of the things you guys say and put them together because, we've talked about, top level signal. We've talked about refinement and kind of starting to peel back the layers a little bit. Brendan, I mean, and both Brendan and Renee, you talked about prioritization, saying like, okay, what might matter? What matters most to you? You talked about co-creation, and then Brendan, feedback, that kind of closing the loop that allows you to continue to iterate. I mean, that's what, just been speaking with a lot of different leaders. I mean, that's the anatomy of a listening function. But not everything always goes well. I mean, bad things happen. I think that, it makes sense to transition to talk a little bit more about some of the roadblocks that organizations face. Brendan, I want to throw it over to you to talk about, hey, are there some roadblocks that, you hit? And most important, how'd you get around them?
Absolutely. I think one of them that we faced early on is around adoption. And I know Renee touched on that earlier. And I think the lesson learned with that is make sure you allocate time to actually take action after. I think we put too much energy, in designing this feedback loop or this survey or this different mechanism where we're capturing this information. But it's so important to make sure you have planned out that action step after. So it's one thing to get all this feedback, but it's got to be actionable. We have to show that, we value the input there and it's driving towards some different outcome. And so make sure that you plan time to actually take action. And that was definitely a lesson learned in the early days of rolling some of this stuff out.
Yeah, I love it. Renee, I know you've come across a lot of roadblocks.
Oh, go ahead, Chris. I'm sorry. I thought you were.
I'm going to just say, let's dive down into some of them.
Yeah, I think the first one that always comes to mind is mindset. I think it's a big roadblock is a lot of people don't think that there's a problem. Again, we talked earlier about these really high NPS scores, the watermelon analogy about really digging in. But hey, if you're good with what your metrics are showing you, you don't have a problem. And I think getting people aligned to what I would call customer centricity, whether that's customer experience centricity or employee centricity, really means being okay, open, and vulnerable and allowing for understanding and being curious about what really is going on. And that is not typical today in many cultures, right? It's okay if we hear bad news. Actually, we want to hear the bad news. That's not the norm. And I think if you can start to work on from the leadership level about why feedback is so important. As a leader, I want to hear it. I'm okay with it. Nobody will be punished for that, or there won't be any, if you want to be a truly employee-centric organization, it has to be okay to fail. It has to be okay to make mistakes. But hearing those early and often and being able, Brendan, right, to fix it and have a really strong way to incorporate what you're hearing back in. So I think that's one of the biggest roadblocks that I have seen. And this dependency on what I'll say is traditional numbers and dashboards that people just assume are accurate. And I can assure you, I have seen more than once, many times, where we've had to dismantle those numbers and say, yeah, it's not really as good as you think it is.
Mm. And Chris, just to add to that also, I think it's important, and just over time learning through this, is don't start with those numbers. So if you do a survey, you do get feedback, start with the actual feedback, that free form text that the customer gave you. Start with that when you're reviewing this with leadership or peers or different departments, and then follow up with the number, because it kind of tells that story of how we got to that number. And I think if you start with numbers, and if they are low at the beginning, you get a lot of, friction and confrontation with it. Start with the feedback that people are saying, and then that segues into how your numbers are the way they are when you're getting started.
Yeah. You know what I love about that, Brendan, and I used to say it all the time, is put the voice of the customer in the middle of the table and start with that. Even if you can take recording clips from calls, or quotes that you have heard from them, and always lead with their voice. It's very hard for people to just say, I'm not going to pay attention to that. No, we're just going to ignore that. And if you do that over and over again, it really does set the tone.
So true.
I love it. I love it. And Renee, even going back to what you shared earlier too, I mean, sometimes, we've talked about that in terms of, building an experience culture in IT, having, being unafraid of the feedback, thinking, even as we're talking about here today, thinking about and listening to people. There's another good example came across in research, a very, very large financial services organization, one of the top 5 in the US. I think they take an interesting approach in that experience is actually a part of their IT technology governance process. In other words, we all here today, within IT, have some sort of governance process for changes, within IT. And what's interesting there, and then some other organizations, they actually have an individual, an experience gate in that process. And I'm thinking, a woman I had interviewed built the EX function there, and she would ask people, as part of when they got to her gate, who'd you talk to? Did you co-design this with somebody? What kind of feedback you're getting? And I think it kind of stymied people for a while in the organization. But what started to happen is that they know, when they got to this individual, they were going to have to answer these questions. And over time, and over a period of several months, it really actually caused a change to their culture. And I thought it was just a powerful example of kind of taking experience and listening and then kind of baking it into, some of the things that we all do today.
Chris, I just want to make a quick note on that, because I do think it's one of the biggest success factors. Is one of the first things that I do when I'm working with somebody is I want to see what their release model is. And I want to see where experience is being interjected into that entire end-to-end process. And what I mean by that is, when are the employees being engaged to understand how are you measuring those feedback mechanisms? How are they coming into it? And where is the accountability to fix them? And if you're not in the process, if experience is not in the process, it will not happen. It'll cut to a point, but that's when I see maturity. That's when you start to see a really well-oiled machine is in governance and then in process. So nothing hits the end user unless it's had these important points that we brought up earlier today.
Absolutely. Brendan, I wanted to, transition, back to you too, and, perhaps talk a little bit, within IT, about, the, engaging with business stakeholders, becomes a lot more important. What I wanted to ask you is, how have we changed over the years in terms of how we communicate and engage with business stakeholders, or some of the things that we've done to, continuously improve those relationships?
Absolutely. One of the big changes that we've made is starting up these focus groups. And so it's just giving us time that's set on the schedule to sit down with the business, get their feedback, get their feelings, understand, what challenges they face day to day and areas that we can improve, and also what we're doing right. So the things that we've done to improve, how has it benefited the organization? And it's been eye-opening to be able to sit back with some of these individuals and some things that we've never thought about once they kind of map out, the impact that it has. One of them was around, communication. And so we send out an email communication around some sort of maintenance. And so the feedback was that, hey, we remember that there's maintenance in the system, but we don't necessarily remember when it is. So we're searching our emails, trying to find it. If we had one portal where we could go to where all the communication from IT was, that would be very helpful. And it was something that we sat back and kind of scratched our heads saying, hey, this makes total sense. Why don't we have this today? But it was us spending an hour out of the day that the business was so gracious to give us and just provide feedback. And there was nothing off limits. So we could talk about a key initiative that was going on or just business as usual type of work. And it was very, very eye-opening. So these these focus groups are a new area for us that we continue to build upon, and we get new lines of business that come in wanting to do these with us, and it benefits us greatly to be able to get this feedback.
That's incredible. That's awesome. Renee, I was wondering if you would pick that up as well, just talking a little bit about how do you better align with business partners, and what are some of the other, tactics, techniques or tactics, to help improve those relationships?
Yeah, I mean, I think what Brendan said is leading with empathy, I think, is always the way to go. I think it's also really important for leadership, IT leadership and business leadership, to understand that there's a common goal here, and there's business results that people are trying to achieve. And, getting out of this is what I do, this is what you do, and remembering that there's ultimate outcomes that will happen. And the role that IT leadership plays in that is significant. There's nobody, like I said, every company is a technology company these days, so it doesn't matter what you're doing. This is really about making sure that the business needs to have technology that will enable them to get their job done in a way that their employees can do it in as well as possible. And the business needs to look at IT as no longer this kind of group of people sitting in the back and, pushing, like I said earlier, pushing buttons. Really count on your IT organization to be the technology leaders that they are. I mean, their heads in this game every single day. And I just think there's a lot of opportunity to break down those barriers and those silos and open up to what's coming next, and kind of getting rid of those legacy mindsets that may exist. I think unifying against common business goals between IT and the business is really is the most important. And making sure that those are very clear, and what IT's role in accountability in making those happen, and that the business being open to sharing those so that they do come to fruition.
I love that, Renee. I actually want to stay with you for a moment, because I've seen, you lead some workshops that I think are very effective in doing that. I was wondering if you can take, a little time to talk about some of the visioning workshops that you've done.
Yeah. We talked about me, working within the design thinking framework, but it's beyond that, right? When I help customers think about how to tackle a big project, the first thing that we do is we want to get not just the IT leadership in the room, but the business stakeholders that are participating, and anybody that would have that would benefit from this. And it's really very simple prompts, like, at the end of this project, what would great look like? And so it allows for everybody across the ecosystem to have a voice in what that vision would be. And just hearing from each other allows for people to put themselves in other people's shoes. So now we're, sitting at that stakeholder level. And then, of course, it's about identifying, well, what could stop you? We've just painted this beautiful picture as a leadership team. What could get in the way of that? And identifying those roadblocks right away, and then putting people into ideation to get those roadblocks out of there. It's a really strong kickoff to anything that's IT is doing with the business. You can then lever that down by bringing in end users and bringing in people and doing a visioning workshop with them. If we think about a launch or something, what would great look like for you? And right in the room, you have IT and end users and the business. And I call it the three-legged stool, the trifecta of having those three groups in the room at the same time, looking at what's great and identifying those roadblocks, so that you are getting just solutions that make sense for everybody, and it's unified from the very beginning.
I love it.
It's one of my favorites.
Yeah, I've really, when I've been able to be a fly on the wall, they've just been fascinating. You see the energy kind of build in the room, and people just walk away with a different mindset, and I think it's very, very powerful. So I want to, some questions have started to come in, and I wanted to transition to answering some of the audience questions. And by the way, if you haven't already and you want to ask a question, please feel free to use the Q&A feature, at the bottom of the screen. But I wanted to get going with a couple of great questions here. Brendan, this is a great one. I'd love to have you start with, because there was a couple of things here. Someone mentioned, that their team struggles, based on this because, it's just not part of the traditional IT skill set. And, it might have a little bit of difficulty get going. How do you deliver some of the tough feedback? And specifically, how have you and your team, or how does Citrix, how have we managed that transition?
Great question. So I think it touches a little bit on what we just spoke about a bit ago. I think it's starting with the user's feedback. I think naturally we like to go towards metrics and numbers, NPS scores, customer effort scores, and we start with that. I think if we flip it, like we talked about before, and kind of lead with the customer's voice, there's not much that you can, split apart there. And so if we start with the employee's voice, and we create those assumptions based on that, I think that helps us digest it a lot easier.
Yeah, I love it. I love it. And how, maybe a little bit more, I know we've talked about, some of the things that we've done internally and some of the relationships that you've, set up and facilitated to help make that happen.
Absolutely. So the key is partnering with the organization. So not trying to take all this on alone. We've been very successful partnering with different lines of business inside of Citrix, HR, for example, our customer success team as well. But just finding different mechanisms where you can partner with the organization, you can harness some of the things that they're already doing. For example, with HR does some poll surveys, they do new hire surveys. And so we've been able to tap into those to be able to get direct feedback on areas for improvement for IT by not having to recreate that wheel. So partner with your different organizations, because most likely there are mechanisms already in place to capture feedback, and you can kind of tap right into those and leverage them.
Yeah, and I was going to say too, Chris, I think with COVID and just this new normal that we're in, really believing that the employee's voice is important as we move forward is so critical. And that messaging, I think, is really getting very loud in the marketplace right now. It's not just Citrix talking about it. I've seen other, analysts and large think tanks reporting on that employee experience is now one of the most critical data sets that you could start to gather, and sharing those out with your teams ahead of time so that there's some awareness of this change and that the voice of the employee is going to become more and more important. So when that feedback comes back, that may be tough, or, as you go back up sometimes in IT, back into engineering and different parts of the org that are creating the product, the earlier that they know that the leadership within IT finds the employee voice important, I think you'll get more play in there too with those folks on the team when they're hearing that feedback.
I love it. I love it. Two good points. Actually, you just made me think of something else from some prior research. And that's simply, it's also kind of changing the mindset of, some of those target conditions that we sometimes put up. We're often chasing a metric, so, think about a contact center. I'm trying to, if you push, call resolution time, too much, well, then you're going to be hanging up, then you're going to have some, behaviors, you don't that you don't necessarily want to see. And I think, part of that pivot too is just rewarding, and I love what, this came from both of you, is starting to focus on some of the behaviors, perhaps rather than some of those traditional metrics that might actually cause the behaviors that we're not looking for. So, let's reward the behaviors that we want. And then, oh, by the way, those, the metrics that, that we're watching are probably going to, get to where we want as well. Another great question from the audience here. How do you measure? It's a simple one. How do you measure success? Brendan, I'm going to start with you with that one.
It is a great question. And I think it really goes back to what you're trying to achieve at the end of the day. There's different tools you can use. You can look at, Net Promoter Score, customer effort score, to be able to see where you're at. But I think it goes back to, what are you trying to accomplish? Is it looking at holistically how you're performing? Is it looking at a specific product launch or a new service that you're rolling out across the organization? So looking at, adoption in those cases. If you're looking at how we're providing value to the organization? Are we looking at, customer effort score? Are we removing that friction? And that's what it would tell us. So I think it's dependent upon what that goal is you're trying to focus on. And I think it goes back to your point before. We're making sure these metrics are being used to measure the goal, and the metric doesn't become the goal, because then it brings a different type of behavior at the end of the day.
Yeah, it's great.
Yeah, Brendan really nailed it all. I'm a huge fan of customer effort, even over NPS. That's a little secret, because I do think that if you really think about what IT is trying to do, it's to help people be as productive as possible, jobs to be done. And effort means that it's frictionless, and it becomes, less frictionless, which they're basically saying it's easier for me to do my job. And that's a great score. I think that we definitely have a reliance on NPS that may be considered to be looked at. One of the things that I think is one of the greatest measures of success is when you can get employees to stand up on stage and tell the world how great your organization is. And that kind of that advocacy, that voice where they would be willing to go on video and help IT be more successful because they believe so strongly that this organization is there to help them be supportive is another great indicator. Were they away from you before, and are they closer to you now? And are you finding that more and more people are willing to help you? And I look at currency as time. Are they willing to give you that time? Will they fill out more surveys? Will they come into maybe communities that you're building with employees, focus groups? Are you getting more people raising their hands, wanting to be a part of the change, and they believe IT is doing the right things by them? You'll see those numbers go up where more people want to engage. So that's not exactly a traditional number, but it's one that I do look for, is actual engagement back into the organization.
Yeah, I love it. And just to, I just want to put a little exclamation point on it. Some research that we had collected in 2019 showed that technology, 75% of the survey respondents said technology was important in part of choosing a new job. So, people care quite a bit about that technology. So, Renee, when you just said, hey, when if I have, end users and employees standing up and talking, becoming advocates and, maybe being advocates for the technology experience, that makes, you more of, that helps with, attracting new talent in the war for talent.
Chris, what you just said is really important. I have a few people that have just graduated from university on my team, and they have told me stories of how they left the companies that they were interning with purely because of the technology. And I mean, real fact, where they said, there is no way that I would stay with a company that provided this level of technology experience. So if it may be something that may not be important to your org today, but if you're bringing in folks that are graduating from university now, they have expectations, and it's up to us to understand what those expectations are and give them the technology experience that they're expecting from at this time.
Oh, I love that point. Actually, you just reminded me of another story as well. With a handful of, I would say, employee experience focused CIOs, there was a handful of them from financial services. And one actually talked about ghosting. And what he shared was we have a problem with ghosting. In other words, about 2% of employees after the first few days, on a job, just stop coming. And the CIO to his right said, 2%, you're lucky. We're at about 5%. And, both organizations had actually done some diagnostic work and, survey and found that, some of that was actually due to technology. And, exactly what you described, an environment that just, people just don't feel it's conducive. I can't, progress drives people. And if I don't feel I can get something done, I can't make progress in my role, in my career, I feel held back, I'm going to have to go elsewhere to find that progress. It's addictive. I'm actually going to turn to another great question here. And, I think the partnership theme is resonating. We've been talking about IT quite a bit, but of course, this involves HR, and that partnership is critical. Brendan, maybe start with you. Just can you talk a little bit about how we've been evolving that partnership over the years between HR and IT?
Absolutely. So we work closely with our organizational development team, and so they really help us focus on, what are we doing holistically across the organization? What's the feedback that we're getting in from employees, not just specific to IT, but across the organization, so we can harness those areas of opportunity specifically inside of IT as well. So if we're looking at, the friction that we're talking about in terms of processes, that processes seem, just overburdening in terms of getting something done. We pull that into, our next planning session on how we can focus in that area. So the benefit of partnering with HR is that we're not just solely looking at technology, we're looking at the overall employee experience. And so things that, maybe we haven't even thought of, we haven't even planned yet, we get to use that information to make sure when we're rolling something out, we're already thinking about it in advance.
Yeah, I love it. Renee.
Yeah, innovation demands breaking down those silos. I mean, it is absolutely critical that when you're looking to build an end-to-end experience for your employees, that this is not just about one function. Our employees don't look at it that way. They just, again, jobs to be done, and they don't really care who owns it. They just want to make sure that it's a great experience. And things like journey mapping, or, empathy maps, things like that can really help not only identify where you may be struggling today with your employees, but building the future journey of where you want that experience to fall can really help innovation, spurn with this group. And I am a huge fan of that kind of trifecta of, the IT, the end user, and the business, or HR, IT, and facilities when you're thinking about what will work look like in this next year? How do we really dig in and understand what's important to our employees, given, as we start to move out of this COVID pandemic, it's top of mind for everybody. How am I going to work? How do I help my employees who feel like they've been unbelievably productive, and still give them an opportunity to, drive an experience for them that makes them want to stay at the company. Retention numbers and all those things are super important as well. So the more that, IT gets out of it just being about technology and realizing that it's, not only HR and the business and the outcomes that you're driving for them, I think will be, is super important.
Yeah, I am so glad you just talked about real estate too. Facilities are real estate. Because when you think about it, and in how we talk about employee experience and how a lot of the industry thinks about it is really in three ways. We have that cultural space, the digital space and the physical space, and those three things are inputs into the employee experience. And I think for a lot of companies, you have, like a spark will go off in one part of the organization, perhaps in HR, perhaps in IT, saying, hey, I have a role to play. Certainly in HR, they've historically, been entrenched in thinking about it, but I think that's that next step in evolution is, kind of reaching out across those silos, saying, hey, we really should be working together. There was a great example came across, in our research around physical space, even, when you think about, okay, I need to have all these things come together. There was some research done, by a couple of individuals whose names are escaping me, but they found that, for creative thinking, for innovation, that something like ceiling height matters. And so, if you think about, okay, designing my workplace of the future, especially, moving forward, and, the different things people might, be looking to accomplish, and, the technology that might help facilitate, that collaboration and creativity, especially when people aren't, may not be able to be in the same room, but also that physical space when people can be in the same room, something like even ceiling height, matters based on what, what people are trying to accomplish. Well, great. How about, someone did ask, there was another follow-up question about, breaking down silos and, helping people communicate more effectively. Any other tips or techniques that you've come across?
Yeah, I've talked about the visioning workshop and how we always kick off any engagement, no matter what it is, where you bring in cross-functional stakeholders and leaders to get everybody aligned into what would great look like. And when you do that and you actually have people in the room collaborating on that statement, it allows for the space for people to talk about what their point of view is, which is really important. Again, when we go from that inside out versus that outside in, and we think we know what's right for everybody, is where those silos form, because you're so entrenched into what matters to you. Yep. But when you're driving employee experience, it's not about you. And that's one of the biggest things that something like a visioning workshop can do. It can remind people, when you bring in what employees are saying and you say, okay, guys, we got to fix this thing. What would great look like a year from now? What would great look like 2 years from now? When you identify those, and then you say, well, what would stop it from happening? What are the roadblocks that would get in the way? And then you collaborate together about those roadblocks. It's very powerful to get people aligned to what's coming on. So I am a huge believer in any type of project that you're kicking off. Bring it, even have end users in there. What would great look like? Let's say you're launching a typical, anything that you're launching out of IT. Imagine having end users in the room and then their voice being a part of the vision of success or measures of success, identifying the roadblocks that could get in the way from that being successful, instead of it just being out of one function. So that's one of my favorite tools that I use as kickoff, and it does break down silos for sure.
That's great. So, we're running close to the top of the hour. I just wanted to wrap up with a question for you both. And that's, what's next? Especially maybe I should target that one at you, Brendan. When you think of what's on the plate for 2021 and what's next for you?
Absolutely. So we have a large list that we want to tackle in 2021. Really looking more holistically at the overall experience. We're very good at digging into, a product launch, something new we're rolling out to the organization. But how do we look more holistically to measure our overall experience? And then how do we also just continue to ingrain this into our DNA? So when we're looking at, our quarterly ops reviews, how are we plugging in the overall experience of those IT services into some of the metrics that we report on? Is really a key for us moving into 2021, is having service owners, look at the experience when we're measuring the health of an IT service. And so that's our big focus this year, is moving more towards this holistic view, because some of these, product launches and new services coming on board, we've pretty much tackled, and we're in a good spot, but we just want to see that broader picture and have a way to benchmark it.
Yep. That's great. Renee, I wanted to ask you, what can we offer the audience here about, any effective tools and things that we have that can help them so they can learn more?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, if you're a Citrix customer currently, go to our Success Center. There is a lot of information out there around how to start looking at employee experience. Just some very, easy ways to start to get into it and use some of the tools that we have out there. If you're a larger enterprise Citrix customer and you're looking for some larger scale services around this and some of the things that Chris and I can do, please feel free to talk to your sales team and see if that's available to you. Because, this is, I think, what we're going to start to see, Chris, this is all going to be about IT investing. I think in actually a lot of things, Brendan, but then also actually having people that own experience within IT. I think we're going to see more and more technology experience roles emerge in 2021 so that somebody is actually responsible for it across. And I think that is something to look forward to.
I love it. I just want to tack on one thing. We actually have a very large research effort that's launching in just a couple of weeks, and it involves, exactly how do you develop a deeper understanding of employee experience in the organization? And, even more specifically, what kind of it offers practical advice about how to operationalize EX, and it encompasses some of the things that we've been talking about here in terms of, focusing on how do I help bring somebody's individual progress, to the center. How do I develop, become better about empathy and partnership within the organization, and bringing together IT, HR, and real estate in support of a better employee experience. So it involves, we collected quite a bit of data, some of which I've talked about here today, and some interviews with organizations that are doing this today and doing it effectively. So watch out for that. But first, I wanted to thank our audience today. This has been a lot of fun. We appreciate your questions, and then I want to thank, of course, Brendan and Renee. It's been wonderful chatting with you today. And thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Chris.
Thanks, Chris.
Enjoy the day.